The most important contribution that Darwin made for our understanding of evolutionary thought is his ideas on natural selection. Natural selection is now viewed as the principal mechanism of evolutionary change. It's based on a series of testable hypotheses, and it's still the most powerful idea in all of biology. We want to go back to the Galapagos, and we're going to use the Galapagos finches as an example to understand the basic precepts of the theory of natural selection. So here we have this volcanic archipelago off the west coast of Ecuador, and you have all these different islands. Darwin looked at all these different species there, and it's been a laboratory for understanding evolution for the last few decades, most famously by the study of these scientists, Rosemary and Peter Grant, who wrote a book in 1986 called The Ecology and Evolution of Darwin's Finches. The Galapagos Islands are like a World Heritage Site, they're a national park, and they have a research station where a lot of scientists come to study evolutionary patterns in these different bird species. Going back to Darwin, he noted that the size of the beak reflects the lifestyle of the animal itself and of its diet. And let's look at this in a little bit more detail. We have some birds who have rather wide, strong beaks, and others that are very thin, pointy beaks. And it's very convenient to make the analogy between these heavy beaks and heavy-duty pliers versus these thin beaks and needle-nose pliers. So all these are bird beaks shown as diagrams, and then each one has an equivalent kind of shape in our modern toolkit of pliers. Okay, now let's look at those beaks and let's think about what Darwin articulated in his theory of evolution by natural selection. First, from Malthus, is the idea that more individuals are born than can survive to reproduce. In the Galapagos, the food supply varies. Some years there's lots of food, sometimes there's hardly any food at all. During those hard years, there's a lot of starvation. So here we have a particular species that we're going to be looking at, Geospitza fortis, during a drought. And as I'll show you shortly, a large proportion of these animals may die in particularly difficult years. Secondly, is that individuals vary in most traits. And if you're in a group of a lot of people, you can look around and no two people are exactly the same. And so we're going to have variation in any population. And in the case of the study of the Galapagos finches, the scientists precisely measure their beaks because that's their kind of link to their diet. And so we have ways of measuring the length of the beak with these tools here and these calipers for measuring the width of the beak. Okay? And within a variety of different species of Geospitza, we just want to look at Geospitza fortis. This is from the heaviest, thickest beak to the thinnest beak. And so here's a bunch of variants within this population. Okay, these are other species, and we'll talk about other species of Geospitza later. But for today, we're just focusing on Geospitza fortis and the fact that no two birds have exactly the same beak, even though they're the same species. There's slight variations. Okay? The third idea we want to look at here is that certain individuals by chance happen to possess traits that are more likely to survive and reproduce. Okay? So let's look at the Galapagos. Here is what the island looks like in a nice year. This is 1976. They had a lot of rainfall, so the leaves have turned green. There's a lot of insects for the birds to eat. The plants are producing seeds. Life is pretty good. But the very next year was an El Nino year. And El Nino is something that affects global climate in the short term, particularly with rainfall in the Pacific. And so there was a severe drought the following year. And so without the rain, the plants couldn't flower and they couldn't produce seeds. So what happened on the island is that there was normally a pulse of seeds being produced by good rainfall. So the amount of seeds that were being measured went up. And then as they're being eaten by the birds, they start going down. Now there should have been another pulse in 1977 to bring it back up, but there wasn't. So the birds have to eat all the seeds that they hadn't already eaten from the year before, and so the seeds are starting to get really, really scarce, okay, through the rest of that year. So food is disappearing. And that's where we see a profound effect on the population. And so ordinarily there were over 1,000 birds on this particular island of the Galapagos, but as the drought proceeded, the birds started to starve, and 80% of the birds had died by the end of 1977, so a massive die-off. Now, there were still seeds as the drought proceeded, but those were difficult seeds to crack, okay? And so ordinarily there's a diversity of seeds being produced by the plants on the island, but all the softer, easier seeds were consumed first. And the only seeds that were left as the drought proceeded were really, really tough nuts to crack, as it were, okay? So the average hardness of the seeds went way up as the drought proceeded. So there's still food, but only if you could crack open that tough nut. So it turns out that, well, yeah, some birds could crack that tough nut. They're the ones who, by chance, happen to have bigger, heavier beaks. And the heavier the beak, the more likely they were able to crack open a tough seed, okay? So only hard seeds are available by the end of the drought, and only those large individuals could eat the harder seeds. Now, the fourth point is that the variation that we see in the population must be at least partly heritable. That is, the size of your beak is determined by how big your parents' beaks were, and therefore how big your children's beak will be, okay? And this is true in the case of Darwin's finches. So if we look at the size of the beak of the parents, those parents who had larger beaks, they had offspring with larger beaks, okay? We have two lines on this graph. These open circles and dotted line show the size of the daughters' beaks, and the filled in circles and the solid line are for the sons. So male finches have bigger beaks than do females. So we have to control for sex, but you can see that either way, large parents are going to have larger daughters and or larger sons. Okay, so that it is indeed true that this trait is inherited. So we have these four components. More individuals are born than can survive to reproduce. We had this drought, 80% of the birds died. We have individuals varying in most of their traits. Some birds had small beaks, some had large beaks. Individuals with certain traits are more likely to survive and reproduce. Those would be the ones with the big beaks were able to survive because they had the capability of cracking the tougher nuts. All those with smaller beaks will have died. Variation is at least partly heritable. That's true too. In all of these cases, evolution then is inevitable. The population couldn't possibly stay the same under these circumstances. There has to be evolution. And what we see then is that the average beak size for males here, females here, remember males have bigger beaks than females. This is the average of both sexes overall. That beak size was relatively constant within each sex over several years. Then we had the drought, and now only the large birds are surviving. They're the ones that were able to cope with the big, tough nuts. They're the ones that are now leaving the offspring. So in the next generation now, the species has evolved, and they now have bigger beaks. So what we want to see here is an understanding of how populations evolve, okay? Only those individuals who had the larger beaks were able to reproduce. It's their children now likewise have larger beaks in the next generation. So it's the population that evolves, not individuals. Individuals inherit unmodified traits. You just happen to be lucky to have a parent with a bigger beak, then you'd have a bigger beak too, you'd make it. Individuals carrying different heritable traits are then going to show differential survival and reproduction. If you're lucky, then you're the one that gets to breed, and your offspring are the ones that will be in the next generation. And so an increasing proportion of individuals will carry the favorable trait in the next generation. That's evolution. that favorable trait becomes more common in the next generation.